First thing, when you start your paper, I hope most of you have done at least one mocks regarding the MYP assessment paper in your school. So you have some understanding how the exam is structured and how does it look like. So you have three tasks: task one, task two, task three. Task one will have 5 questions. Fifth question you are very familiar with. That's a compare and contrast essay, which is a 20-mark essay. The first 4 questions are analytical questions, the 2-mark and 3-mark questions that you'll get. The command terms which you have been learning all through your MYP become significant in this question. Why? Because I'll bring you to a command term to understand that. See, this could be your possible question which you might get for exam. Identify 2 visual techniques used by the filmmaker in text P and explain how they establish the central message of equality. Or something like analyze. These 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, up to 1.4. These 4 questions are your 2-mark, 3-mark questions. And each question will have a very specific command term. And if you don't understand the requirements of the command term, you won't get anything beyond a 1 mark. Even if you're at a really good response, if you're not addressing the command term, you won't get the marks. Why I'm saying this is for most students, even if you get a command term like analyze, somebody will still only go with identity or identify or just go with comment. So each command term is very peculiar for IB. So make sure that you are familiar with the command terms when you prepare for exams. And why that becomes important is here. For most command terms, except for maybe like identify, state, or list, these ones, I hope you can see, yeah, for these ones, all the other command terms like analyze or explain, these ones try to go with the simple command of analyze. For example, if you're getting a question with the command term, second. Okay, you're getting a command term. This is a 20 command term list. And imagine that you're getting a command term like discuss. For discuss also, go with the approach which we're going to discuss right now for analyze. Or you're getting a command term like evaluate, same thing, analyze. If you're getting a command term like critique, same thing, command term, analyze. So except for 3 or 4 command terms, for every other command terms, you are required to follow the structure that you use for the command term analyze. Because every question fundamentally asks you to analyze. That's a very simple definition of it, especially the 3-mark questions. So the 2-mark questions might be asking you to state or identify things like that. That's okay. There you can simply state something or identify something. But for other command terms, please use the typical PEEL format to use. Point, evidence, explanation, link. That is the way to go. Plus the E also, the effect on the audience, which will come. This becomes much more important when you start writing the compare and contrast or any other essays. But here also, try to follow the PEEL method for any 2-mark or 3-mark questions, except for identify, state, or list. Such kind of questions which are asking just to name things. Okay, I hope that is clear. Now, here is something which is very important. As you know, your task 1 is dealing with your compare and contrast essay, which becomes your 20-mark, one of the most difficult. When I ask my students, which is the most difficult out of all the components, they all say it's compare and contrast, due to its difficulty in structuring the response and understanding. But how to prepare for compare and contrast? That's the first question they ask. So there are a lot many things which you're supposed to understand before even attempting a compare and contrast. One thing is, you know that one is text. One text could be a video and the other text could be a text. So there are supposed to be conventions about which is supposed to be prepared for. And for a video conventions, you are supposed to be prepared for camera angles, lighting, sound, mise-en-scene, and symbolism. These are the major elements out there which we expect you prepare for your exams. Yeah. All of these things are what we expect you to be prepared for your video analysis if you're preparing for a compare and contrast essay. So if you guys are not very well prepared with these concepts, please make a note of it and make sure that you prepare them very well for the upcoming examination, because that is required to make a really good compare and contrast essay. Keeping that in mind, of course, you have a literary text also. There you have many of other terms which we expect you to know. But I know remembering these many concepts is a bit difficult at this last point in time. So I'm just gonna make it a bit more easier for you. These are the expected top topics which you're supposed to cover. But if you ask me to make a short list out of it, I'll just select 2 or 3 out of it. something like imagery or metaphor, personification, symbolism and motifs, and of course, irony, tone and mood. This is something which most of you guys make a mistake when you are given a text to analyze, where you're writing about the tone, you actually talk about mood. You're writing about the mood, you talk about tone. So make sure that you know the difference between both of them. And then diction, of course. And then dialogue and dialect, foreshadowing and flashback, and then maybe to some extent you can talk about ethos, logos, and pathos if you want, and rhetorical questions. So after this full list, I am just just reducing it into 50%, so that if at all you have lack of time and you need to prepare instantly about a couple of topics, I would just go for these topics, be prepared about these things, and make sure that you know them and you know how to track them or identify them or comment about them in an extra given to you. So this is something which you can do for the last month preparations for exam. So please make a note of that. Then yes, as I thought command term. So whatever the command term is, go for the logic of analyze, except for like list or use such kind of command terms which doesn't ask you to go anything deeper beyond the surface level. You can go with a very simple plain answer. But for other questions, please do your analytical skills, bring in the PEEL strategy, and do answer the questions. And yeah, I hope you might have a lot of questions to ask. Don't worry. The last 10 minutes, I'll be giving you to ask your questions. Then you can post your questions in the comment box at the time. So till now, you can just go through my presentation, and then yeah, you can hold your questions and you can ask me later. Okay, this is just an extract from how your eAssessment will look like, because I'm very sure that most of you might have done some sort of eAssessment in class using the real IB paper. But some schools don't permit that. They will just do their assessments in some other software like Assessment. So for them, this is how it looks like. This is the screenshot of an assessment paper. It will look like this. So questions will be labeled like this. You will have marks. The video will be like this. So you can click the video, play the video. And on the right side, you'll have a space to write your answer paper. So this is, okay, sorry, there is a technical glitch. Okay, so this was just a screenshot posted for you to understand how the eAssessment platform looks like if you have never attempted one on the real eAssessment platform. Okay, so now we'll go to task one. Task one, as you know, there will be 5 questions altogether. It will be analyzed based on 20 marks for criteria A and 10 marks for criteria B, out of which 10 for each A and B for your compare and contrast, the fifth question. And the first 4 questions will be for out of 10 marks for criteria A. So that's how it is. And I hope everybody knows the word limit for a compare and contrast essay. So if you know, can you type in the chat box, what is the word limit you expect for a compare and contrast essay? 350, okay, I can see the response, 350, fine. I have a real question now. Do you guys actually write only 350 words, or can you write beyond that? Okay, at least 500, 350, I can see many responses. Okay, I'll take a suspense. Okay, 350 is the minimum requirement, not minimum requirement, a recommended limit by IB, but I have never seen a really good response for 350 words. You can always go way beyond 350 words. In fact, some of the responses which usually gets a 6 or 7 is usually around maybe 600, 700, or even 800 words. So I would suggest always minimum, try to aim for a minimum 500 words at least. If you want to go beyond that, that's also welcome, because there is no penalizing for exceeding the word limit in IB, unlike many other curriculums like Cambridge or something. So it is okay for you to cross the word limit. So please, since that provision is there, please make use of crossing the word limit. Go to at least 500 600 words, because really good compare and contrast essay requires that. So let me clarify that first itself, so that you don't have that idea of 350 words. Okay, I should limit my response to 50 words. No, nothing like that. Okay, so you have the analysis criteria. You have the organizing criteria, again, 10 marks each for your compare and contrast essay. So I have some couple of sample questions for you and a video for you. Of course, we can't play the video or discuss the text in detail in the class. But if you guys want to practice this, you can take a screenshot of the screen where we have posted 4 questions for you guys. There is a video for you. This is the text 2. Text 1 will be the next slide, which you can see in a minute. But you can see the questions here. The 4 questions, the 2 mark and 3 mark questions, starting with identify, analyze, identify and comment, evaluate. Here's one more thing to add. Some questions will probably have more than one command term. For example, here, if you see the first question, identify and explain. Okay, this command term is hidden here. So just because the command term is only asking you to identify, please don't stop there. Go for an explanation or go for analysis if possible. That is the best way to score your marks. That's something we should check. Make sure if there is more than one command term in the question. The question might at times will only have something like list or state, but eventually when you read towards the end of it, it might ask something else also. So make sure that you read the question 2 times to understand what the question is asking for you, and then answer it appropriately. And then yes, here is a compare and contrast task for you. There is a video posted, my quality ad, which is available on YouTube. You can check that. And then here is your task. Yeah. Here is your text one, which is about an article, an open article by the author named Gulgun Mamdi. So this could be used as a sample preparation task for you guys. You can use the same task, take a screenshot if you want. And then the question will be something like compare and contrast how both texts connect to the idea of respecting diversity. Keep this question in mind because what we're going to do next is going to explain the structure of how to write a proper essay. So then you can keep this question in mind to see if you are writing the response as per requirements. Okay, so a compare and contrast will have a text like this, a text one and a text two, which will be video. And then you're expected to write a long answer, around 400, 500, 600 words response, wherein you will have at least 4 paragraphs, one introduction and one paragraph for the comparative aspect and one for the contrasting aspect and one conclusion. And for every paragraph, we follow a structure, which I hope you guys might have used multiple times in your classrooms, which is the PEEL structure or the PEEL+E structure. The extra E I'll explain in a minute. Of course, you know what the PEEL means. First, P is the point. Whatever you're going to talk about, the first thing should be mentioned in a very short sentence, which is a point. And then you give an evidence to your point. Whatever claim you're making, you're supposed to give an evidence to that. And you explain the evidence and the point, which becomes the analysis. The explanation can't be just description. It should be analytical. It should have observations which are not very obvious. Okay. And then you link it back to the point again. And then at the end, we have an extra E called effect on the audience. Most people miss this E altogether, but please do bring it in. What is the effect that the chosen literary device or text has on the audience? So this is especially important for the body paragraphs. So when you write a comparative paragraph or a contrasting paragraph, make sure that apart from the point evidencing link, also do talk about the impact on the audience. Okay. Now, the $1,000,000 question. What is the structure for a proper compare and contrast essay? I hope you guys are all following some kind of structure in your schools, which is fine. But we are just giving you some other structure, like a similar structure to that. If you want to follow the structure, you can keep it. I'll quickly go through the structure. Of course, you start with your introducing both the text. This is the first paragraph, the introduction paragraph, wherein you introduce what text A is. So text A, as I showed you right now in this, if you're taking this example, text A is an opinion article by an author about the experience she had when she traveled from her hometown to a university in Georgia. So text here revolves around the racial injustice she faced there. So that could be how I'll start with my body paragraph here. I'll be explaining what text is in a brief summary in 1 or 2 lines. Again, text B, I'll explain what is text B focusing upon to showcase what is the idea of that. But even before that, if you want to include a hook sentence, even before you start, you are welcome to include that. Okay, if you can start writing with a hook statement, do start with it. And how do you write a hook statement? Anything to connect with the question, anything to connect with the keyword in the question can be your hook statement. The key word here, for example, in the question is how do both texts connect to the idea of respecting diversity? So your philosophical take or a rhetorical question, anything to do with the idea of respecting diversity can be a hook statement, which you can add. It's always welcome to a hook statement. Even if you don't have, it's okay. But if possible, do add a hook statement. Once a hook and text is introduced, then you go to something called a thesis statement, which becomes the most important, what you call, the pillar stone for any good response. A really good thesis will lead you to write really good body paragraphs. And how do you write a thesis statement? You include both comparative and contrasting elements in a sum up way in your thesis statement. Here, if you look at it here, text A depicts the theme of whatever is the theme of isolation or theme of discrimination, whatever it is. Identify the theme here by using a specific technique. So you're supposed to label the technique here. Since text A is a literary technique, literary work, you're supposed to talk about a literary technique here. It could be metaphor, it could be simile, it could be whatever techniques we have listed before. In the screen, you can choose any one technique, label it there, make sure that you can analyze the technique in detail later, because whatever you're writing in the statement, you're going to explain that in detail in your body paragraphs. So text A depicts the theme of whatever theme by using whatever literary technique, while text B exposes the theme of whatever is the theme and tell, of course, text B could be dealing with the same theme at most of the times, or could be a different theme. What is the theme? Identify a theme, and then state what is the technique being used. Here you talk about the film technique being used. You can talk about the lighting, you can talk about cinematography, you can talk about the editing, you can talk about the sounds. It's up to you. You can choose any relevant technique which you think is good enough for analysis, and then you bring in the comparative and contrast aspects. Whereas both the text showcases a similar idea of blank through blank by showcasing dash. For example, so till here, you're writing the contrasting aspect. You're actually starting with the contrasting element. So text A depicts a theme of whatever the theme is, theme of racism, with by the use of metaphors. While text B exposes the theme of something like, again, racial injustice, using the technique of sound techniques or cinematography. This is your contrasting element you have placed in the beginning of the thesis statement. And then you talk about comparative element. While both texts showcase a similar idea, then you bring in a similarity. What is similar in both the texts? And try not to say that theme is similar in both the texts, because theme is by default will be similar in both the texts. That's why those two texts are given to you. You're supposed to identify something which is way beyond theme, which is similar in both the texts. Maybe the way characters are placed, maybe the way certain ideas are portrayed, maybe the way certain elements are developed. It could be anything. So whatever you identify as similarity there, place that there through what technique is being showcased. So you should figure out, okay, what is that one common thing which is making them similar in terms of the element you have identified and the technique you used. So talk about that. One good thing which I usually suggest is to go for the choice of words, the diction, because most of the times you can see the kind of words used in the video and text could depict something very similar. So go for that or something else. It's up to you. There are a long list of things which you can identify. But I'll just give you one example. So that is how by showcasing what is it showcasing? What does it mean? What is it trying to say? So bring that by ending the thesis statement here. That's one way to develop a really good thesis statement. But of course, there are other examples also. So if you want to go with a structure for thesis statement, this is something which we would recommend. And then once you're done with the thesis statement and the directory paragraph, you go to something called a body paragraph. Yes. So here you have the first body paragraph, which is the similarity body paragraph. We're going to talk about how both the video and the text are similar to each other. You start with a text A sample. So text A highlights the idea when so you give what idea is being talked about. So in this specific text, it talks about racism. So you can bring in that or any other topic you think is being the main idea of it. You casing the top, mentioning what technique is being used, and then you use how is the technique creating an effect on the audience, which is part of the PEE, the extra E you add to the PEE technique is there. So, but you can rearrange it the way you want, but make sure that you're making the point out there. You talk about the talk technique out there, and you give an example from the text. So, example from a text A, which is a literary text, could be a quote, a word, or a phrase. You're supposed to quote that here. So, make sure that you are putting that it in double quotation marks, whatever word you have chosen to write. Bring that here. And again, same thing. You're trying to bring the similarity in text B also. For text B, same thing. You're identifying something which is there in text B, which is similar to the way showcased in text A. And then you say an evidence for the same thing. An evidence for text B becomes a timestamp because it's a video. So of course you can't quote a word as an evidence. Mention the timestamp. So 12-minute, 1 second, or whatever is the time you're referring to. Make sure that you mention the timestamp as an evidence there in a text analysis. So bring that also, and mention the cinematic technique because it's a video, of course. So not in literary techniques, but cinematic technique, and of course the effect it creates on the audience. So these things should be there in your comparative paragraphs, and make sure that there is an effective comparison happening there, because most of the time students will tend to write isolated statements. So they'll write something about text one, something about text two, but there is no comparison happening. So that's where you bring in all the connective words and make sure that the comparison is being talked about. Wait, I'll come to that. Yeah. So usage of transition words. This becomes very much important when you write a comparative paragraph, mostly with any paragraph in contrasting paragraph. But make sure that you use them appropriately in your responses. So as you see, similarly, likewise, in the same way, also both correspondingly, these kind of comparative transition words, make sure that you use them at the right moments to bring in the connection. If not, you will be penalized in your criteria B. So this adds on to the way you organize your ideas. So please make sure that you use them in plenty. But of course, don't overdo it also. So keep it in mind when you write the comparison or contrasting paragraphs. Now, again, we'll come back to the contrasting structure. So here you're contrasting, as you know, you wrote one paragraph for your comparison where you'll be explaining how two things is to be compared using what elements and structure out there. And then what is left here is contrast. One second. Yeah, I hope it's visible now. Yes, so you have your contrasting paragraph here. You have the main structure. So this is a sample posted here. It is not required for that you should follow the same structure, but if you want, please follow the structure. On the other hand, text A showcases. What does text A showcasing? Text A showcasing racism by using any specific technique out there. And again, you list a timestamp. The idea is brought out through a specific technique. So yeah, here you're supposed to talk about any specific technique which you think is contrasting. So you can contrasting is a bit more easier to do in compare and contrast because comparison becomes difficult. It's difficult to find similarities there in the text, but it's very easy to find differences. So yeah, text A is depicting something using some technique. Text B is depicting something else using some other technique. So you state both of them, and then the effect on the reader is mentioned very explicitly, and you then you bring in the analysis. How is that showcasing the whole idea? Link it back to the question asked. Make sure that you always the comparison contrast. People will go with the comparison contrast the way they want it, but then they forget to make the connection with the question asked. So make sure that at any point both the paragraphs, both the body paragraphs are independently connected to the question asked once you're done with the main structure. So keep that in your mind. And if you have any further questions regarding compare and contrast, keep hold your questions till the last minute. We'll take your questions at the end. Okay, then of course you have the conclusion like any other passage, you have a conclusion to write. So as you can see, what do you write in a conclusion? You can put your judgment if you want. For example, both text explore the idea of hope. Text A primarily could be considered as the most effective text to bring out the theme. This is because compare and contrast is not asking you to balance between both the texts. Yes, when you argue, when you analyze it in your body paragraphs, you're supposed to make sure that you analyze both of them. But conclusion is your personal statement. It is your observation. You can bring in your thought process stating that one text comparatively outshines the other text in terms of depicting a particular topic or in terms of bringing out a specific usage of technique, whatever it is. So you can bring in that value judgment as long as your your body paragraphs is supporting that. If you think that your body paragraph has very well analyzed both of them, and you think that the analytical response is stronger for one text, you can state that in your conclusion. No questions at all. That can be done. There's nothing wrong with it. But if not, you think that both of them done an equal job, you can say that also. That's also fine. So there is no wrong or right thing here as long as you can justify your purpose. And yes, and what should be there in the conclusion apart from that valuation? You should reiterate the main point out there, and then a larger implication of the life itself or the text itself or the based on the question. The way you started with the hook, you starting the if you're starting the response with a hook statement with a very philosophical idea, make sure that you give some conclusion to the question or the hook statement you started in your conclusion. That makes it a full circular structure for your response. Yeah, then you can connect to any of the key concepts out there if you want. These are all optional things. If you want to do, you can do that to bring in a little bit of extra spices to your response. So that's how it is. Again, the entire structure of introduction and two body paragraphs and conclusion is given in detail in a very analytical way. If you want to take a screenshot, please feel free to take a screenshot and prepare your response as per the structure. Everything is summarized here. What needs to be done in the comparison paragraph, in the introduction paragraph, in the body paragraphs, and in the conclusion. So please feel free to do that. I'm not repeating the points because it's already mentioned very clearly in the previous slides, and here it's just a summing up of what was mentioned before for you to refer to at a later point in time. Yes, this is something which I want to talk to you about, because when we talk to other examiners who grade your papers, or even to teachers from other schools, they say something which is very interesting, because most of you tend to be very superficial in your analysis. This is a mistake most of you make, which is what is stopping you from getting anything above a 4. So for students who think that you're mostly stuck with a 3 or a 4, after response is mostly because of this. Your analysis is very, very plain, very superficial. You're not going into details of stuff. You're not going into analytical response. You're not talking about the non-obvious things. There are a lot many obvious things which you can see in both the texts, which is understandable. But your scores become only improve when you write about the non-obvious things, the things which you can't initially see in the first reading, the things which requires your deep analysis. So when you talk about those things, that's where you get most marks. Something like both text uses metaphor uh, to showcase a theme is a very simple, plain statement. You're supposed to say what is the kind of metaphor being used, what do they represent, how they function differently, or similarly in each text. So these elements adds to the complexity of your response, which eventually gets you better grades. So make sure that you're doing that than a simple, superficial response. Even when contrast, don't just note the settings are different. Explore how is the setting different. Don't say that both the texts have different setting or same text settings. How, to what extent, and in what way. So go deeper beyond the surface level writings to get better scores. Okay, that's something which we had in mind to tell you. Okay, here's a quick checklist for you to cross-check any compare and contrast response to that you write, to make sure that you're writing a really good compare and contrast essay. Make sure that there's introduction of the text types along with the intended audience and purpose, and then use at least 3 transitional words to show similarities and differences. We'll come to the transitional words again when you can see it. But as I showed to you before, make sure that you use these words in plenty, the comparison words and the contrasting words in your response. And then evidence of your claim, whatever claim you're making. Text one uses cinematography to showcase the trauma experienced by characters. If that is a claim you're making, make sure that you evidence for that claim. At times, students will make a claim and give a reference or an evidence which has nothing to do with the claim. So make sure that you give a claim which goes way well in hand with the claim that you're making. If it is a video, give that video stamp which corresponds to that, and focus on at least 2 stylistic techniques which brings out the similarities and differences each for the text and the video. Yes, so here again, most of you tend to stop with explaining one technique, but we suggest you go for 2 techniques, because even if your analysis is not that strong with one technique, the other one is good, the teacher, your examiner will give you marks. So it's always good to have to talk about 2 techniques at least for both the text in your comparative or contrasting paragraphs. May not be in detail if you don't have time, but you can talk about one technique and then you can add on to about another technique. For example, if you're talking about how is cinematography being used in the video to showcase the character's point of view, if that is what you're explaining, you can also include how lighting is adding on to that, or how sound technique is adding on to that, or how is editing contributing to that. Same thing with the literary text. If you're talking about how is metaphor helping in communicating the theme of a specific text out there. Then, alongside with that, how are similes or symbolism contributing to that alongside with metaphor? So please do bring in more than one technique alongside with the main technique to complement with it, to make sure to showcase your examiner that you're really good with this. Okay, then explanation of your claims and evidence correlates the requirement of the question or purpose of text. Yeah, make sure that whatever you're writing is in relation to the question asked. And then conclusion with effects of creator's choice. As I said, do talk about the effect on the audience or the effect made by the creator's choice. Whatever is the literary device being used, what is the effect it creates on the audience. Do talk about that. Yeah, these are the main things to sum up in your mind if there's a quick checklist for you guys to check on. And then again, transition words is something which you should keep in mind for both contrasting and comparison paragraphs. There's a list of transition words you can use. Similarly, likewise, in the same way also, and try not to repeat the same word again and again, because this happens when you start using similarly, you will put on again similarly. Don't do that. There are a lot many words out there. make sure that your vocabulary is broadened with other words and use them wisely in your response. So that is something which you should keep in mind. Okay, that's about the comparison and contrast. Now we'll quickly go to task two. Task two, as you know, is a task where you are actually showcasing your creative writing skills at its best, because that is the task where you use a picture to create a story out of nothing, a prompt and a picture to create a story. Okay, so before we start, again, I'll put the same question to you. What do you think is the recommended word limit for task two? You can use a chat box. Okay, 350, 350, fine, 350. Great, yes. Okay, 600. Somebody have mentioned 600. Okay, 350 and beyond. Yes. As you know, for all three tasks, task one, task two, and task three, the compare and contrast, the task two and task three, IB recommend 350 words. But as teachers, we usually say that for task one, the compare and contrast, and task three, the non-literary text production, you should go way beyond the 350 words. So you can go to 500, 600, or 800 words. But for task two, it's if you want to stop it to 350 words, that is fine, because you can really write a really good, intriguing piece of writing with just 350 words. That is acceptable. So, if possible, if there is one question for which you really want to stick on to the word limit, that is task two, because I hope you can bring in whatever is asked in the prompt based on the image in task two just using 350 words. And of course, you have two criteria C and D. And then, of course, there is no global context required for task two, not even for task one. The exclusive use of global context is coming in task two, which I'll explain. But we will show you a sample question for guys here. If you haven't practiced anything till yet now, this is how a sample question will look like for task two. You will get two pictures, you know, and most of the time, trust me, the pictures that IB is gonna give you are extremely boring pictures. Okay, something like the second picture here. Okay, you would never get something like a very very stunning picture about which you can write a lot. You will get something like this. Okay, this is a normal IB picture, something like this. This is an exceptional IB picture. IB would never give something like this. This is an exception. Don't expect this, but yeah, we just gave you an example to see how things can go. But the idea is that when you get a picture which is very stunning and with not many elements out there, make sure that you go into the detailed analysis of the picture to answer the question. And two things to keep in mind: there is always a prompt, so there's a prompt given there, and there's a picture. So whatever you write should have connection with both the prompt and the picture of your choice. So what is the prompt here? It is journal entry inspired by the image that brings out the theme of isolation. That is the question. So the response you write should be a journal entry. You can make it as creative as you can. And you might consider focusing on any of the following literary features using setting, characterization, conflict, and float. This keeps changing. And at times IB asks you, instead of and, they'll put an or and say, okay, you can use an or. But even if it is or, try to use them all in your writing. Even if IB says or, use either settings or characterization, please make sure that you use them all, because a really good story or a really good task to writing will have an effective use, an effective blend of all of them. So please use that wisely. And then whatever picture you get, make sure that the picture is connected very well with the prompt, because the prompt is asking for isolation. So check for the element in the picture which you can describe or bring it out into your story, which can connect with the idea of isolation. Do that very wisely before attempting the picture. So if whatever picture is there, which thing you think can be connected very well with the prompt, with what you write, choose that picture and start writing. You can plan for a little bit of time, maybe like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, plan what needs to be written. And once the planning is done, you can start with the writing. And proofreading is also important. So make sure that you finish the response in 25, 30 minutes so that the 5 minutes can be used for proofreading. Because unlike a pen paper test, you're writing it on a software. So you have the liberty to edit the response after writing. And editing kind of erases half the mistakes you make in writing, which you might even realize. So make sure that you finish the task in approximately 25, 30 minutes so that you will get the rest of the 5 minutes to edit. So that is your task two, and what needs to be kept in mind when you write a task two is something like this. When you check the image, make sure that you're analyzing the people, the object, the setting, all of these things, the foreground, the focal point, the emotions, the mood, the tone, all this, the sensory impressions. All of things should be checked for when you check the specific text out there. Make sure that you have that in mind. And one more thing, one most important thing is Usage of literary devices. You have learned a lot about the literary devices. You'll be analyzing them in your text one, but task one, sorry. So task two is where you use them. So make sure that you are bringing in some kind of symbolism or metaphor or simile or imagery or whatever technique you want you have learned into practice in your writing. So task two is also to showcase those skills to bring them into your writing if possible. And then this is the most important instruction we give for students for any task to approach. Please show, don't tell. So it is very crucial to make sure that whatever you are writing in task two is showing something rather than telling something. An example is given here. Try not to write Sarah was scared. If Sarah is a character name, don't tell that if she's getting scared. No, describe it through words. Sarah's hands trembled and she. One second, sorry. Yeah. Sarah's hands trembled and she reached for the door handle, her breath coming into shallow gas. This explains that she is scared. So rather than just telling that she was scared, this is a very poor writing strategy. No good writers would never ever use this in their writing. You might have read like hundreds of stories by this point of time. So try to go with this telling strategy rather than showing strategy. Sorry, showing strategy rather than telling strategy. Another example, the place was mysterious, which I've seen when somebody describes the plot or setting, they just try to put it out right. This is mysterious. Don't do that. Bring it through your words. Shadows pulled in the corners and faint hum, mechanical or otherworldly vibrate through the floor. Whatever way, bring in the mystery. If it's mystery, if it is horror, if it is suspense, whatever the theme you're trying to portray, make sure that you express it through words. You show it us through all the images you can build up rather than directly stating that away. Okay, just keep that in mind. That is the most important tip which we can give for your task two. Okay, then again, now we'll quickly go to task three. As you know, task three is where you produce a non-literary text. That's again, it is asking for you to write something in 350 words, but please go for something like 600 or 500 words if you can, because really good responses will have at least 600 words maybe. So 500, 600 is the minimum thing you can go for. So make sure that you can type up. But of course, it's not about the quantity; it is always about the quality. But at times, the quality will also get compromised if your quantity is way too less. So make sure that you stretch your word limit up to 500 or 600 words. Keep that in mind. And then, yes, task three becomes very important because this is the only task wherein you are expected to make direct connections with the global context. So make sure that that is checked. If not, you will lose marks because none of the other questions is asking you for a global context we mentioned. This question is specifically asking you for a global context. And of course, it is asking you for a specific text type also. It might be a blog, it could be a speech, it could be letter. I'll give you a list of texts which might possibly come. But yes, make sure that you're prepared to answer a question which is based on any text type which is going to come. So do keep that in mind. Thus, we'll quickly go to questions, we'll understand it better. As you know, task three is the one single most question with the highest grades possible. It's a 30-mark question. So try not to miss that up because that's a 30-mark question. It's checked for all B, C, and D, all three categories of criteria. And as you know, this year's global issue is identities and relationship for your exam. So you know which global issue is going to come for task three. That is very clear. But make sure that you're prepared to answer a question which is going to come based on the specific global issue. So this is taken from MYP Principles of Practice. As you know, the global issue of identities and relationship include a lot many categories of personal, physical, mental, social, and spiritual health, and also human relationships, including families, friends, communities, and culture, or what it means to be human. So you can get a question, something around these lines. So it is a bit broad. So whatever which comes under this could be a question that you might get in the exam. So be prepared to answer the question based on the specific global context. Yeah. So here's a sample question for you guys. So do check the question given here. This is how your task the question will look like. It at sometimes it might have a description alongside with the question, or else it will be directly a question. Write an opinion column for the school or community newspaper arguing for and against the idea that losing your mother tongue means losing a part of yourself. This is the question. But sometimes the question will also have an added note to read before reading the question. That is for you to understand what exactly do they mean by these words. So losing mother tongue means losing a part of yourself. What does it mean? So if you're unclear about that, they might have something like a description posted here. Language is never a tool for just communication. It is a carrier of identity, memory, and belonging. When we lose a language, we lose a way of seeing the world. When we gain one, we gain a new sense. For many young people today, the language spoken at home and language spoken in the world outside are not the same, and that gap can feel like a wound or a gift depending on the day. So something like this will be given to understand the context, and then you'll have a question asking you to write a specific text type. Here, the text type is opinion column. So this is where I want you to prepare for specific text type. Make sure that you prepare in detail for a specific text type, so you don't mess up the format, because opinion column is way too different from a newspaper article. It is obviously different from a diary entry. So make sure that you know the text types and the format required to write something like this. And of course, the global context. Make explicit connections with the global context of this relationship. Not just implicit connections, but explicit connection. What do I mean by explicit connection? Make sure that you use the word identity or relationship or the words which are part of that, which can connect with the idea of identity or relationship in your response, to make sure that your examiner will feel as if the student has done a good job in connecting the prompt with the global context, to use them explicitly. Okay, again, word limit is not 50. This is what IB recommends, but go for 500 or even 600 or more than that if possible. So that is the right way to approach a question in task 3. Yes. So one quick thing to keep in mind, if you have a confusion regarding how to integrate global context into your writing, just ask these 4 questions to yourself. You will understand. So what ideas or values does the global context make me explore? So the global context is identity and relationship. So if it is that of the global context, how or what value does it mean? How do I integrate that into my writing? How does context change the way I'm writing to my audience? Again, keep the right audience in your mind when you write any text, and make sure that how you're talking about the specific global context is going to benefit your audience. That in mind. And again, what examples or anecdotes? Okay, this is something very peculiar, because in English, we don't learn any specific anecdotes or examples or evidences to be used in task 3 in class. I'm very sure none of you might have prepared anecdotes in class in English, but you can use them in task 3. And how do you use them? That's where your other subjects come into picture. If you might have prepared extensive notes for your content heavy subjects like humanities. So you have notes regarding many historical figures, their ideas, their thought process, their values, and things like that. If you think there's any relevant quote or anecdote or statement or example from a real life scenario which you can use here, you can use them in your writing. You can quote that person in your writing. If it is like if you're asked to produce something like a magazine article or a newspaper article or something like that, of similar lines, where you can bring that in. So do use them, anecdotes or evidences if possible, but don't prepare anything for English. Whatever you know, if you remember them, please use them if you want. That's acceptable. Yeah. So can I close the text by returning to the global context in a meaningful way? Again, even if you are using the global context in your introduction or in your body paragraphs or whatever way, in whatever you text you write, try to end your conclusion with connections to the global context, because that stays in the mind of the examiner. So it's good to keep the global context explicitly in the conclusion at least. So if you're not bringing it anywhere else, also it's okay if you are making only the implicit connections, but make sure that the explicit connection is made in the conclusion at least. So keep that in mind. So these are the things we had. Again, text types. So if somebody have a doubt, okay, what text type should I cover for task 3? Here is a long list of text types which you can cover. But even covering half of them will make you cover almost all of them, because it's almost the same for the format at least, even though the way it is structured could be different, but the format could be very similar. Because a product review and film review, here you can see a book review, product review, and film review. They're all 3 of them are reviews. So just the product changes. Once there's a book, there's a film. So you're supposed to set the appropriate vocabulary and right, but the structure is kind of similar. So that's the same thing with many other things out there. So make sure that, of course, in essay, which is a persuasive or descriptive, the tone and the way you structure argument changes, but the format is kind of the same, similar. So that is something to keep in mind, but make sure that you have an understanding about these text type, because if somebody is asking you to write something like an appeal, you should know what an appeal is, and you should not write something like a blog post there. So make sure that you're familiar with the text type and the words used to describe a specific text type in your response. So be prepared to do that. That was it from our side. Now it's the time for you to ask questions. You can use the chat box, We have 5 minutes to take your questions. So if you have any questions regarding any aspects of eAssessment English paper, please feel free to ask your questions here. Okay. One question I can say, can you please provide a list of possible text types that could come in task 3? I hope it is there on the screen. I'll bring it back to the screen again. These are the possible type of text types which can appear in your exam. The list has been compiled based on previous year papers and what has been done in all major schools for task 3. So you can expect anything out of this for your task. Okay, in the short responses, Vihan have a question. Short responses, do we use PEEL format for all? No. For a question like just for identify, you may not need to use a PEEL format. For a question like comment, you may not need to use an analytical question format. Mostly for a 2-mark question, which doesn't have keywords like analyze or discuss or explain, you are not required to use a PEEL format. But if possible, go for a PEEL format. That's what we say. If possible, if you have time, go for PEEL format. If not, if the question is very straight, identify 2 techniques used in the video. There no explanation is required because the question is very simple. But if it's a 3-mark question again, whatever is the command term, do go for a PEEL format. Take that question as an analytical question. Consider the keywords analyze. Even if the question is asking for you to comment or explain, consider the keyword as analyze and give a PEEL response to make sure that you're getting all the 3 marks of the question. But for a 2-mark question, it's not required. It depends on the command term. The command term is identify your list or state. It is not required. For any of the command term, it's good to go for a PEEL response. Yes, Ms. Krishna has posted the numbers for you guys to contact. So if you are interested for more sessions like this, or if you want to take we offer crash programs for MYP, you can contact the number. It's also posted in the command in the chat box. You can check that also. And what are the questions? Yes, in task 2, only based on the writing, or are we also just on the story itself? Or if we are, how do we know if our story is good or not? Do you have any tips on how to write a good story? Okay. Task 2 is based on 2 things. First of all, is your story connected very well with the image you have chosen? Are you using the elements in the image very well in your story? That's first thing. Second thing, is your story connected very well with the prompt? If these 2 things are checked off, halfway it is done. And then 2 criteria is being checked, criteria C and criteria D. C is checking for these elements here, the way you construct a story. How well are you showing the story, as I said before, rather than telling the story? How well are you connecting the explicit and implicit links in the prompt and in the image to the story you create? So that creativity gets created for the task 3, for the criteria 3. And for criteria C, and for criteria D, it's the language part. How will you use the language? How is your register? How will you use the vocabulary to showcase the emotions? How are you bringing the literary devices in a really good way in the response? So those things matter. So that's how you write a really good story. What a social media post extended means? Yeah, it means that you will be asked to create a LinkedIn post, or you'll be asked to create a Facebook post. You will be asked to create an Instagram post also. Extended means because social media posts is usually very short, right? You hardly write only 100 words or 150 words for most of the social media posts. But since an exam requires you to write way beyond that, you'll be asked to write a very lengthy social media post, which can go up to 400 or 500 words, explaining a topic. So how is that different from other text types? Since it is a social media post, you can be slightly casual there, but of course you can't be too informal there, but can be very slightly casual in your language if required. That's acceptable in a social media post. As we know, it is meant to reach out to a wider audience with different literary tastes. So in compare and contrast, they say, do we have to tell the difference in the techniques or used, or also tell some difference in the way ideas is presented? The compare and contrast, they say, do we have to tell the difference in the techniques used, or also tell some difference in the way the idea is presented? The idea is to show the difference or tell the difference in the way you want. If you want to say that something is similar in some aspect, but the technique used is different, you can say that. For example, both the video and the story, or both the video and the text uses a similar plot line, but they are using a different technique. Text A uses metaphors to communicate the plot line, or text B uses cinematography to communicate the plot line. That's accepted as a contrast thing. That's okay. So you can either talk about from the technique perspective, wherein it is showcasing the same thing but different in techniques, or they can say it is showcasing different thing but it's the same techniques. Both are accepted. As long as you converge and diverge throughout the essay, it is okay. So the comparison contrast is happening the same idea, which is also fine. How is a layered response written? It is preferred over a standard PEEL answer. Okay, layered response is beyond the very obvious thing. Can you find out something deeper? For example, text A uses similes to showcase the author's point of view. Could be a statement. You can make it layered by text A uses the simile alongside with metaphors to showcase how a trauma has affected the author's perspective in bringing out the character's point of view, something like that. So, which becomes a bit more analytical than the first obvious statement. So, that's how we bring in a layered sequence. Yes, standard peel mostly looks like a very, what do you call it? It looks like a very it looks very disconnected. Which, if you check the response, you'll understand. When people simply try to write a peel paragraph, it feels as if they're filling a checklist. They're writing a point, they're writing an explanation, they're writing an example, and then they're linking it all back, which looks very mechanical. For that, you will mostly lose marks for criteria B because it is losing something called a flow. There should be flow of ideas in the paragraph. When somebody reads a paragraph, it should feel as if it's a continuous flow of ideas. So if you are just using a peel technique to just check, make as a checklist, you might lose that. So make sure that you bring in some layered responses to do it in the right way. So that's something which you can keep in mind. Okay. What order of questions do you recommend we take? Should we start with a long response and then go for shorter ones? It's up to you. But I suggest go with the compare and contrast first because, in fact, at times it takes more time to plan than other two tasks. So if you want to spend more time on planning, then start with compare and contrast first, and then finish up that. The other two you can instantly write without much planning. Of course, they also require planning, but in comparison with compare and contrast, the planning time is way less. So start with compare and contrast if you want to go with one. In the compare and contrast, I say, do we just have to tell the difference in the techniques used, or also tell some difference? Okay, I hope I answered the question before. Yes, for task two, can we be subtle with the image representation, or should it be obvious? Yes, you can't be subtle. Yes, you can talk about subtle elements in the image after talking about the obvious ones. You can be subtle, of course, that you can be subtle, but make sure that you also talk about the